Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here this evening for our webinar on LDs and ADHD, how to support students who learn differently. My name is Jenna Burke. I wear a whole bunch of different hats here, but today I'm going to be focusing on my role as a premium tutor and executive function coach here at Apple Ruth. I'm going to give everyone a couple minutes to join us, but we do have a poll that we would love for you to fill out, just so we can get a good idea for who you are, where you are in life, and how we can help you shine, what kind of assistance you're looking for, and whether you'd like someone to reach out to you to give you a little more information about us. So I'll give everyone just 1 or 2 minutes to fill out that poll, and in the meantime, we will get started. Okay. So first off, Apple Ruth, our why we are here. So it is our core belief that when you change students' self-beliefs, you can change their lives. And that's actually something that's going to really be at the heart of tonight's webinar and discussion about students with LDs, that if you're able to change their self-beliefs, you can change what they're capable of accomplishing. We build skills for school and beyond, whether it's in academic tutoring, test prep, or executive function coaching. And this evening, I'm going to be identifying common learning differences, discuss common accommodations for students with those LDs, mostly through the school environment, and then also talk about strategies that you can use in your own home with the students in your lives. So first, let's start out with some definitions, because I think a lot of these learning differences sort of get tossed around and everyone sort of assumes that they know what is intended, but that's not always the case. So I'd say that ADHD is probably the most popularized learning difference that people know about. It stands for attention deficit / hyperactivity disorder, and it affects close to 9% of children. And you usually see differential brain development, delays in brain maturation, and challenges with executive functioning, regulating attention, and inhibition. So the ability to stop yourself from doing something that you maybe know you shouldn't be doing. ADD inattentive is different. You'll notice it's missing that H. So ADD inattentive means it's difficult to hold your attention on tasks easily. It doesn't seem like that person is listening to you. They might have trouble organizing tasks, and they have to exercise a lot more energy to create that feeling of inhibition. So ADD inattentive, it might feel like that person is sort of daydreaming, or, oh, what? I'm sorry, I know you were talking to me. I didn't really hear you. ADHD has that H, and that means they're hyperactive. So this is specifically talking about a lack of physical inhibition. So if you have a student who seems like they're, bouncing off the walls, or you've told them, please don't do this, and then you turn around and they're jumping on the bed again. There's a lack of physical inhibition, as opposed to with ADD inattentive, a mental inhibition. Students who have ADHD may often interrupt or intrude on others. They may seem like they're not listening to you, and they just sort of blurt something out. And then, of course, there's ADHD combined, where you get symptoms of both inattention and hyperactivity. Very exciting, fun stuff. Something I do want to mention before I continue is that there is some debate within the neurodiverse community about whether they want to have person first language or diagnosis first. So the difference between that is a student with ADHD, people who like person first language often feel that they want to be seen as a person first, and then ADHD as part of them, but not what defines them as a person, which is totally fair. Other people in the disability community prefer to have their disability first. They would say, for instance, I am not a person with shortness. I am a short person. I'm going to be switching up my language tonight. I'm going to be doing some person first, some disability first. And, it's just sort of giving both options for you. So what makes the ADHD brain different? A lot of times when I'm working with students or with parents whose students have just been diagnosed with ADHD and they're not really sure what's going on, it sort of feels like, well, surely my student is just kind of just needs to learn a little more self-control, or they just need to, have a longer gym class and then they'll calm down. Well, studies have shown that there's actually differences in the brain, not in terms of the size of any particular area, but more about the connections between areas of the brain. So we're thinking about the frontal cortex, which controls attention, executive function, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and organization. And then there's the limbic system, which regulates emotions as well as attention. So sometimes a student with ADHD may have wild mood swings, or they might lash out because they can't calm themselves down. The basal ganglia can cause interbrain communication to short circuit, which looks like inattention. But in reality, the brain just isn't making the connections it needs in order for the student to be able to make those connections in person. And then lastly, we've got the reticular activating system, which is a major relay system. So as well, this is an area where if the connections aren't there, it causes inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. So there's a lot that's going on that is an actual physical situation that is occurring in the brain. So the main culprits, just to get a little nerdy on you, is norepinephrine, which is made from dopamine. And it's a chemical messenger that transmits nerve signals. And it gives you things like being alert, arousal, realizing like, oh, I need to pay attention to that, or just regular attention. So if you've got a lot of norepinephrine, for feeling alert, you're paying attention, you're really with it. If you are lacking it, that can affect your sleep and wake cycle. A lot of students with ADHD report real difficulty sleeping, like they can't turn the brain off. So they've got norepinephrine at the wrong time of day. It can also affect mood. It can affect your memory, which can then become really frustrating. So you may remember dopamine. You may have heard it mentioned as, that's what gives you, that's the hormone that creates the sensation of pleasure in the brain. So students who don't have enough norepinephrine or not enough dopamine, well, it's really hard to pay attention to something boring if you have a lack of pleasure in your brain, right? There's nothing that's like helping you to stick through that boring class if you're just desperate for something to make it worthwhile. On the flip side, sometimes ADHD students will hyperfocus, right? So maybe that's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was down that Wikipedia rabbit hole and it's been 3 hours later and I was reading about World War II submarines and where am I and who am I? So that kind of hyperfocus comes from, oh my gosh, I just found something that's actually going to bring me pleasure, that's going to give me a really, really good feeling. And I didn't get to have that all day because I didn't get to choose anything that I liked. So then the flip side of that is, oops, I forgot to eat because I was looking at Wikipedia for 3 hours. Personally, I like thinking of ADHD as not an attention deficit, but attention dysregulation. So the idea that you have attention, you just can't control it in a way that's helpful for you. So you might have a lot of attention, but if you can hear, I'm in Virginia, so I can hear the cicadas outside my window, and it might be really difficult for me to concentrate on the discussion that I'm hoping that we'll have here tonight with that Q&A at the end of this presentation. But I might be hearing the cicadas and I can't get my attention to bring sort of majority focus over here. Instead, I'm kind of 50-50 with the sound outside my window and me wanting to talk to you right now. So it's not that they don't have attention, it's that they're not able to place it in the areas where they've been told, hey, I really need you to pay attention to this. And something that's really, really important is that neurodiversity diagnoses frequently coexist. So for instance, 31 to 45% of children with ADHD also have a learning disability. 25 to 40% of children with dyslexia also have ADHD, and 25% of children with ADHD also have dyslexia. A lot of this stuff is linked together. ADHD also presents in, and this is a very large percentage, so I grant you that, but a certain proportion of individuals with autism spectrum disorder. I won't be talking a lot about autism spectrum this evening because it is not a learning difference, but it does often find itself in the same conversation. So students who have autism will often have ADHD, dyslexia, a processing disorder. A lot of these things will appear also. So if any of you in the audience are interested in hearing more about how to help people with autism when they're trying to, continue on their learning journey, hopefully some of this will be helpful to you as well. So I've mentioned executive function a little bit, so let's really get into it now. So executive function skills are generally about these 4 concepts. Planning, so the ability to go like, okay, I've got this journey, I want to go with my friends to the beach tomorrow. So that means that I need to probably like pack tonight, and oh, I don't have sunscreen, so I need to like go buy the sunscreen, and then I need to have it, and I should probably like figure out what address I want to put into my GPS, and all of these different steps about planning the journey. But if you're not able to do that, you might wake up in the morning, get halfway to the beach, and then realize, I never bought sunscreen, or I forgot to bring my bathing suit. Prioritization, this is something that I hear from a lot of my students, is the difficulty of going like, okay, I know I've got all this stuff, but I honestly don't know which one I need to do first. It all feels equally important. Organization, a really important executive function skill. Do you know where all your stuff is? If someone said, hey, where's that paper? Would you be able to pull it out? Or are you going to have to look at all the different piles on your floor? Goal setting and follow through. So the ability to say like, I really want to try out for the basketball team this year. That's my goal. So that means that I need to start working out. I need to, play more pickup basketball in my neighborhoods so that I can start working on my skills. Being able to follow through on goals is really important to executive function. Time management is huge. You often hear of people with executive function lacks, for lack of a better word. They're often dealing with time blindness, of not realizing how long something took, or not being able to say how long something should take. So for instance, I was working with a student, a lovely high school student who, while she'd been dealing with ADHD for a while, had only recently been diagnosed. And so we would keep talking about like, okay, well, how long do you think that chemistry lab is going to take you? And she would tell me, yeah, like 20 minutes. I'd be like, okay, great. 20 minutes. That sounds awesome. I love that. That sounds like a great amount of time to spend on chemistry. And then I'd see her a couple of days later and we'd check in and she'd be like, yeah, it took me an hour. So it's that separation between understanding this is how long something's going to take and maybe how long you wish something took, or maybe to her, it really genuinely felt like 20 minutes. But then when she looked at the clock, that's when she realized it was actually 60. Self-regulation, another really important one. So being able to say like, ooh, I'm overtired, or, ooh, I really need to eat something, or I probably shouldn't like yell at my dad, or whatever's going on there. So self-regulation, being able to stop yourself is really, really important. And also self-monitoring. So being able to say like, okay, I've had my break and now I need to go and do my homework. Being able to tell yourself like, okay, we're going to stop and we're going to go. A lot of my students say like, I know I need to do the work. I've got my list of stuff, but it's just the actual doing it. I don't know why it's so hard to get up off my bed and go to the desk, but it feels insurmountable. And then lastly, inhibition, which we've already talked about a little bit, but the ability to say, no, I'm not going to go on Instagram until I've finished this paper. Or, yeah, I know I need to do this paper, but my friends are going out tonight and I really want to go with them. Being able to say, no, I committed to getting my first draft done tonight. I can go out with my friends tomorrow, or I can catch up with them in an hour. The ability to stop yourself from doing those impulsive things is something that's really important to learn. And working memory, cognitive flexibility, and self-control are the 3 pillars of executive function skills. Those are the 3 things that are going to help you through the day. And we'll talk about ways to improve those and support them. So while executive function skills are not a learning difference, they are something that often is found with ADHD students. They really struggle with executive function skills, but they often are a deficit that people are struggling with all sorts of learning differences. So we're going to move on to dyslexia. And this graphic that I have right here is actually really cool. This is a font that was created by a graphic designer to mimic what it feels like for a dyslexic person when they are reading. So it's not how a dyslexic person views letters. The idea is to make the English language as confusing for neurotypical people as it is for dyslexic people. So I think it's really, really cool. You should definitely check it out on the internet. When you see this is just like going from, A to L, it doesn't seem as confusing. But when you see like an entire paragraph being written in this kind of typography, you can really see like, oh, this is really challenging. And I can understand why my student gets so frustrated when they have to read something really, really long. So let's dig into what dyslexia actually is, because I know that when I first started working with students, I often thought like, oh yeah, it's like the letters flip around in your eyeballs, and that's really not quite what it is. So I think that this definition from the International Dyslexia Association is fantastic and precise enough that I actually want to read it to you word by word. So they define dyslexia as a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So when they say decoding, they are referring to knowing what a word is. So being able to look at a word on the page and go, ah, yes, cow. Encoding, which is often used when you're talking about dyslexia, refers to what we would usually just call spelling. So encoding a word would be spelling a word correctly, and decoding would be reading that word and understanding what it is. I could go into dyslexia for a really long time. I think it's a fascinating thing that the brain does. And I actually have a book that I really strongly recommend for anyone who either is dyslexic or has a dyslexic person in their life and they'd be interested in seeing how they view the world. So that recommendation is coming in a couple slides from now. So look out for that. But in general, I would say that it's just a really fascinating thing that the brain does, and it's not necessarily always a disadvantage. So I would like to talk about several other learning differences besides, the big ones like ADHD and dyslexia. And just a reminder, we do have a Q&A. So if there's any questions that you want to ask me, anything that as I'm going through all of these different learning differences and the ways that you can get accommodations at your school and how you can help your student in your home, please feel free to drop a question into the Q&A. And I'm definitely saving some time at the end so that we can chat. So everything isn't just ADD. I know that I think ADD really gets the main stage when people are talking about learning differences, but it's not just ADD. So here's just a sampling. So there are memory or retrieval issues. So students who have difficulties with short-term memory, they might, sit through a class and then you ask them, hey, what was that about? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Auditory processing issues, so difficulty hearing something and then encoding that information in their brain, or processing it or understanding fully what was said. Visual processing issues as well, so not being able to look at something and take in, say, a graph or a chart and have that make sense. There's dyscalculia, which is often seen as like dyslexia for numbers, which I don't think is entirely fair or accurate. So for instance, I have a little example up here on the screen. So it's an exercise. All right, so everyone ready? How fast can you count these dots on the screen? So I'll give you all a couple seconds to just count them up in your head. Okay, great. We all got them. Okay, so children with dyscalculia take longer than other children to count these kinds of dot patterns, because a lot of us will look at this as grouping, right? You'll see like, okay, I've got like a clump of 4 that's sort of like in a C shape, and then I've got another 4 over there, so that's 8, and then I've got the 1 over there, so that's 9. But if you are dyscalculic, try saying that 10 times fast, you're going to count the dots one by one, because thinking of things in groups or in patterns is going to be really difficult. So sometimes it really can be looking at the number 14 and not recognizing it as what we've decided it stands in for. But sometimes it can be things like not being able to recognize patterns. Dysgraphia also has to do with having difficulty writing, and that can sort of be joined hand in hand with dyspraxia, which is more physical coordination. So you might see this with, a student who has really, really struggled with their handwriting. It could be that they just don't like handwriting, but it also could be that there's something that's more of a learning difference going on. And yes, thank you so much, Marcia. Yes, there will be a recording of this webinar that is available afterwards, and we'll also be sending out the PowerPoint. So if anyone's furiously taking notes right now, that's great, that's wonderful. I'll talk about how helpful note-taking is later on, but we will also be sending out all of these slides afterwards. Okay, so that's sort of a brief introduction to learning differences. Right now, I want to talk about accommodations. So working with your child's school is one of the most important things that you can do, because getting the right accommodations in school can solve so many issues for students with LDs. Extra time especially can be essential for many students with LDs, as they're able to show what they know, but only when they have enough time, right? And that can often be like an easy fix. And something that I often hear from parents, if they're at all resistant to getting their student accommodations in school, is that, well, they're going to graduate school and then they're going to go into the workplace and they won't be able to have accommodations there. So I'm worried that they're going to get used to all of this and then it's going to be taken away from them. Well, I am here to tell you that the Americans with Disabilities Act includes learning disabilities as conditions where an employee may be entitled to reasonable accommodation or modification in order to ensure their ability to effectively do their job. Now, the reason why I said learning disabilities as opposed to learning differences is that it does need to be qualified as a disability, whereas learning differences can encompass a whole bunch, a whole spectrum, if you will, of different neuro situations for students. So you would definitely need to check to see if what your student has is classified as a disability or a learning difference. But for the Americans with Disabilities Act, if you have a disability, that is something that your employer needs to be able to reasonably accommodate. So It's just my pitch for getting students the accommodations that they need and making sure that they're getting that paperwork in early. The longer the paper trail, the easier it's going to be to get accommodations in the future as well. So there are so many different types of evaluations, and they don't make it easy to figure out which type is which. And most of the time, if you're going to have a formal accommodation plan, you usually need to have some kind of evaluation to show what it is that your student needs. So there's a psychological evaluation, and that's usually intended to guide a diagnosis and treatment from a medical perspective. And it really doesn't have a lot to do with the educational side of things. So a psychological evaluation would be really helpful if you want your student evaluated for, say, anxiety or depression, which also show up a lot for students with learning differences. But it's not necessarily going to be helpful from an educational perspective. So then you have a psychoeducational evaluation. So by the name, we're getting closer to what it is that we need. So this identifies the students' difficulties in the classroom, their learning style generally, and what is happening. So it doesn't necessarily provide enough data to diagnose and recommend treatment for disabilities, but it will at least say, like, this is what I am observing when they are trying to learn. So depending on your school situation, a psych ed evaluation, as they are usually abbreviated, can be really helpful. The most in-depth and wide-ranging evaluation is the neuropsychological evaluation. So this is a formal assessment of cognitive functioning controlled by different regions of the brain. So this is very focused on the why. So yes, I can observe what's happening, but I want to know why, like what is going on in the brain that is inhibiting them from doing their best or that isn't creating enough inhibition. And this can be used to diagnose a disability. So I would say that a neuropsychological evaluation is usually going to like hit what you need. But in certain cases, a psychoeducational evaluation is also going to be really helpful. So these formal plans that these evaluations are going to get you. So you may have heard a lot about IEPs and 504s and all of these different types. Basically, an IEP falls under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so this ensures access to special education. A 504 plan is going to, I would say, like streamline you. So you can have a 504 plan and not be in a special education class. But if your student needs to be in special ed, they're going to need an IEP. An IEP has to contain information about the student and the specific and unique educational program that has been designed to meet their needs. It also needs to have measurable annual goals and progress reporting and like a lot of really in-depth description of exactly what the student needs and how we're going to deliver it to them. Whereas if you are in a private school, often you will get a school-based official accommodation plan that is not called a 504 or an IEP. It's something that the school creates themselves. Evidence that you receive school-based accommodations for testing is so important. I really cannot underemphasize that. So if your student is planning on potentially taking the PSAT, the SAT, the ACT, pretty much any standardized testing that they want to succeed on, it is so key that they have evidence that they've been given those accommodations. I had a student recently, wonderful, wonderful, amazing student who was just desperate to get extended time. She really, really wanted it. And when we talked about it a little bit, she said, well, you know, my teachers all give me extended time at school. They just say like, yeah, sure, you know, you can finish the test at lunch. But because teachers were giving her extended time without actually documenting that, hey, this student is really struggling with timing all the time, consistently. She is such a slow processor that the family never felt like they needed to get her evaluated. And she didn't have any evidence that the school was giving her accommodations in the first place because it was very casual. It was very, oh, sure, you can stay in at lunch and finish it. So for all we know, there could be something else going on, but no one ever needed to find out. And now it's going to be a little too late for high school to figure it out. So making sure that you're documenting everything and discussing with teachers like, hey, what have you been observing? What do you think might be going on? Can be a really great start to a conversation. All right, so now let's talk specifically about the kinds of accommodations that students can get in school. So for dyslexia, extended time is a given. It is the umbrella accommodation. It is helpful for pretty much every student. You might receive double or even triple time, depending on how severe the disability is. And that's where that neuropsych report is going to become really helpful. And even if the students don't necessarily want to use a reader or text-to-speech technology so that they're not just having to use their eyes, it's so important to figuring out what the student needs for timed testing. Different accommodations work for different students. So, helping from home. I feel like a lot of people felt like this picture for the last 2 or so years, if not more, that you want to help your student and the student is frustrated and now you're frustrated and everyone's just sort of like, nah. So I'd love to sort of talk about the ways in which you can encourage your student based on the challenges that they're going through to succeed where they might be feeling frustrated or like they're failing. So students need instruction to change the way they view mistakes. If you've ever heard us talking about the fixed mindset versus growth mindset, that is so key. So making mistakes is such an incredibly important way of learning. I really can't overemphasize it. It is so important to make mistakes so that you can figure out what happened. How can I do that better in the future? A mistake should not be the end of the world. So the more that you can make a mistake in front of your student and then go, oh, okay, this is how I'm going to cope with it. This is how I'm going to figure it out, shows them, okay, that wasn't the end of the world. It doesn't mean that I'm condemned to be horrible at math because I had one quiz that didn't go well. You know, that's a great time to go, okay, let me think about how I prepared for this quiz. How did I study? Did I study enough? Should I have taken 2 days to study instead of just 1? What was the environment like in my room, right? Like, that's a way to really learn from what happened, as opposed to just thinking, oh, well, I guess I'm horrible at math and I will always be horrible at math and there's nothing I can do about it. So focusing on your students' strengths is really, really important. So I think that a lot of times people look at students with ADHD and think about all the things they can't do. They can't sit still and they can't pay attention and they can't stop playing the video games. Well, let's start thinking about things that they can do well, right? And tailor what they're trying to do towards that. So if your student is a better listener than a reader, then listen to books. If you need some assistive technology, which I'll get a little bit more into later, get the tools that help you be your best. I know that some people feel like, you know, multitasking is horrible and you shouldn't have music on, but like, if that music helps you block out noise from the rest of the house while you're doing your homework, that's okay. Let them do that. Let them turn on, you know, lo-fi YouTube or whatever it is that they want to listen to, because we need to trust that they know what's going to be helpful for their sensory needs. If they need to throw a ball against the wall to help them study or focus, we want to find a way to enable that without bothering others, obviously. So maybe not like the wall that they share with their sibling, but something that says like, okay, I'm hearing you. I know that that's something that you really need to work on. So everything that I'm talking about right now can really be used for a variety of different learning differences. And then I'll get into some more specifics later on. But the general overarching concept to remember is don't fight yourself, work with your innate design. So this is a really great one that I would recommend for everyone, is to partialize your tasks. So that means dividing them into discrete and small steps. So here I have an example of how you might say, learn how to tie your shoes. So it's going step by step, being really explicit. We've got like little instructions and they're color coded. So students should be doing this for everything. Break everything down into smaller steps and have them review their steps and make sure that they haven't left anything out. Because remember, the smaller your steps, the easier it is to check things off your to-do list. And that feels really great. So if you want to clean your room, don't just have the student say, okay, I'm going to clean my room. Okay, well, let's think about it specifically. I'm going to pick up all the clothes that are on the floor and I'm going to put the dirty ones in the laundry. And then I'm going to do the laundry. And then I'm going to change the sheets on my bed. And then I'm going to do that laundry. And then I'm going to vacuum the floor. And then I'm going to polish my mirror, right? Like, so instead of I'm going to clean my room, a mountainous task that I could never complete in my lifetime, I now have 6 small little bite-sized pieces. And that feels a lot more doable. So when your student gets stuck, inevitably, when they start getting really frustrated, oh my gosh, I can't do it, when all of that negative self-talk comes out, use dialogue and ask them helpful questions. This is basically everything that I do as an executive function coach. I just ask really good questions is the goal. So questions like, okay, can you describe to me what that feels like? Because the more that a student can process what's happening to them, the more that they're able to sort of take a step back and not be owned by the emotion. Have you ever felt this same feeling on other tests or in other situations? What's worked in the past to get you unstuck, right? Let's think about ways that you were able to figure this out in the past and use that now. Or, you know, did you ever feel that horrible about this thing in the past? Did you get over it? To sort of help them see that, you know, sometimes feelings are ephemeral. What about this particular passage or question or quiz or test gave you trouble? So again, learning from mistakes, seeing mistakes as a, ooh, exciting, that this is my chance to learn. I get to figure out what didn't go so well there. And how do you think you can move past this if and when it happens on test day? So if a student is getting frustrated about remembering a particular passage from a history class and they're venting about it to you, think about like, okay, well, what happens if you blank during the test? Do you want to skip the question and come back to it? Do you want to do a data dump at the very beginning of the test where you just sort of write down everything you can remember on the side so that you can refer to it back? Let's think about worst case scenarios so that if it does happen, you don't feel like you're panicking. And the whole goal behind this kind of dialogue is to prime your student to begin to approach problem solving strategically. Frustration is fine. That's totally fair, but you want to then move it into, okay, I'm going to analyze what's going on, and then I'm going to create an action plan. The action plan is the most important part, right? But feeling the feeling is also a step in there. And assistive technology. So I promised I was going to talk about this, and assistive technology is so important. We all realized, 2+ years ago, oh, it's actually really easy to make meetings more accessible. We can just have them on Zoom. And suddenly everyone was fine with doing that. So there are so many different assistive technologies that your student can take advantage of. They can get printed notes. They can, be able to compare their notes to another student's notes that they took in class as an accommodation in school. They can get an audio recording of a lecture. They can get a video recording of something. If they're a more visual person, they need to be able to watch the person who's speaking. You can get an e-reader, which might be more helpful for students with dyslexia. Perhaps it has a voice that reads to you. Productivity apps, so good. There are so many apps at the tip of your fingers that you can just download on a phone and make your life so much easier. And here's a whole bunch of them. So I love this app wheel. I think it's fantastic. It comes from Curry College, which is a wonderful learning differences focused college up in the the New Englandy area of the United States. And this wheel sort of breaks everything down into 4 areas of education. So studying, writing, organization, and reading. So these are all things that you're going to need to do when you're in school. And then from studying, you could be needing to gather information, your memory, self-regulation, mind mapping, all of that is involved. With writing, they've got apps on note-taking, recording lectures, speech to text, word processing. For organization, they've got reminders and to-do lists and calendars and digital storage. And then with reading, they've got resources for digital textbooks and PDF readers and scanning and text-to-speech. So there's all sorts of amazing, fantastic things here where you can just sort of decide, this is what I'm having trouble with, and this specifically is what I'm having trouble with. And oh, I've got like 4 or 5 different options. So I've linked to this wonderful resource on the slides, and you're able to access it by going to Curry's fantastic college website and checking out their program for the advancement of learning. So we've touched on this a little bit. I mentioned that excuse me, that anxiety and depression are often comorbidities with learning differences. So that's also something that you're going to need to deal with your students if they're having a really rough day. I overall strongly recommend this book right here called Brain Hacks, which really focuses on executive functioning. So not necessarily for students with ADHD or dyslexia or who are on the spectrum or have a processing issue. This is kind of for anyone. The language is very open. It does not, you do not need to have a diagnosis in order to get a lot out of this book. But one thing that she really works on is how to work with the social emotional challenges of low executive function skills. So the first step is to identify your emotions, like get to know your feelings, being able to sit and think, am I frustrated or am I angry? Because those are different. You can use visualizations to gain distance from your thoughts. So just thinking about your emotions as a wave that's going to, rising up and then it peaks and then it goes back into the ocean. Listening to your body, doing a body scan. So just closing your eyes and checking in with your body from the tip of your head all the way down to the tips of your toes, doing some nice deep breathing and figuring out, where am I holding tension? Does my back hurt? Does my shoulder ache? Is my stomach growling? This is a very good checklist that most of my students fail a lot. Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Did I go outside today? And if you say yes to the first 2 or no to the last one, then you should probably fix that. So especially for my friends with ADHD who hyperfocus, making sure that you've actually eaten or had something to drink can do wonders for your mood and your ability to keep going. Building emotional resilience. So this was something I mentioned earlier, but this is, just to restate, the 3-step plan for building grit, for building a feeling that you can do hard things. Is to recognize the feeling, I'm really upset. Identify the positives in the situation, not toxic positivity, but okay, I'm upset that I didn't really do well on my test, but to be fair, I did study for it and I did stay in the room the entire time, even though I was kind of freaking out because there was stuff in the test that I hadn't studied for. So those are positives. I did study for it and I didn't freak out and run away and get a 0. And then you need to create the action plan. So, okay, I studied for it, but there was stuff that I missed. So I'm going to, the next time I'm going to make a study plan and compare it with my friend to make sure I didn't miss a chapter. And I'm going to create a study group so that we can study together and I can make sure I don't miss out again. And that is how you build emotional resilience. And lastly, managing negative emotions. Give yourself permission to feel those negative emotions. We've all had a really hard couple of years and it's hard being a kid anyway. So give yourself permission to be sad, to be bummed that you did not make the school play. It is a horrible feeling. And then give yourself room to build an uncertainty tolerance. Do something else that you're not sure what's going to happen, right? The more that you challenge yourself to do things that are slightly uncomfortable, the more that you're going to be able to do more fun and exciting things later, right? If you just stay in your comfort zone, you're never going to be able to see what you're capable of doing. And a lot of times students with LDs feel like they're not capable of doing stuff, which really makes me sad personally, but they're just used to people telling them, you didn't do well enough in class. Why aren't you focusing? Hey, why didn't you take those notes down? So helping them to find places to succeed is really important. So now let's get down into the specifics. And I do want to make sure that we've got time at the end for questions. So hopefully I won't have to rush through too much. So helping students with ADHD, our friendly neighborhood Tigger. So again, looking for the strength in the diagnosis. If you've got ADD or ADHD, that means that, hey, if you're hyper focusing, you're getting stuff done. That's fantastic. Just because you have ADD, it doesn't mean that you're a disaster. There are definitely ways in which your brain works that are going to help you. So look out for what is helpful. Don't fight the fidget. It is okay that your student is tapping their pencil while they are working. It might annoy you, but maybe they can work in another room so you don't hear the tapping. It's okay if your student needs to get up and walk around the house while they're studying. I had a student who just really desperately needed to doodle whenever he worked with me. That was fine. He wanted to grow life on Mars. So I love that he was like doodling orbits while we were working. That was great. Didn't insult me at all. He needed to move. Some students benefit from annotating on the page while they're reading, because then that gives them enough movement that they feel like they're not just sort of sitting there in stone silence. So basically, inhibiting the impulse to move too much, it's taken up too much space of your brain. Let yourself move. And shaking it up also with your topics. So not just moving around your body, but also moving around the topic that you're working on. If you're bored with grammar, do some science. If you're bored with science, do some math. Shake it up. You do not need to do 3 hours of one subject. I personally love the Pomodoro technique, where you work in a 25-minute chunk and then you take a 5-minute break. Then you work for 25 minutes and you take another 5-minute break. There are a million apps that do Pomodoro timers for you. If you have ADHD, I would say 15 minutes to work and 20 minutes for breaks. Just make sure you set the timer so you don't accidentally take a longer break than you thought you were going to. I already said this before, but breaking large projects up into manageable chunks, so helpful. It helps you with initiation, that getting started, because you're making the barrier to getting started so much smaller because you've got smaller tasks that you're doing. Short time limits, small goals. That's the key. Doing something for 2 minutes is better than no minutes. So even if you're setting a timer and saying, I'm going to clean my room for 2 minutes, just getting started, you might say, well, okay, I'll just like finish making the bed. And then, it sort of snowballs from there. You can do that with assignments as well. Okay, I've got this big paper that's due. I'm going to cut it into smaller chunks. I'm just going to look at this page of what's required of me. I'm not going to get overwhelmed with everything else. Distractions are okay. They're going to happen. Something that I really like is if a student's worried about distractions, but they also want to make sure they remember to talk to you about something, having a whiteboard or a piece of paper where they can write that down so they don't have to be worried about forgetting it. A lot of times students with ADHD will interrupt you, not because they're not listening, but because they're really worried that that thought is going to disappear and it's never going to come back. So if you give them a place to write it down, they're not going to need to worry about getting distracted or getting pulled in the wrong direction. So if you have a student whose desk or the floor in the bedroom looks like this, they might have some EF deficits. So remember all of these skills. This is what we're talking about here. Don't give them more than like 3 things to do, because that's going to be so overwhelming. So go slow, point by point. Let's set some goals. Great. Let's build a to-do list. That to-do list of how to clean your bedroom, that's exactly what I'm talking about, step by step. Technology is your friend. I've got students where they set reminders for themselves to do things because they know that if they're going to do it, they're not going to remember. They need to have something on their phone telling them what to do. 20-minute increments is really a sweet spot, and making sure that you've got a place where you are putting all of your information. whether that's analog or digital. I'm a big fan of my bullet journal right here, which is definitely very analog, but just having something where you know all the information is here, I can bring it to school, I know exactly where everything is. Google Calendar, I'm a big fan because it's on my phone. I can always tell where it is, and I can set myself alerts like 30 minutes before something is happening to make sure that I remember, like, okay, well, then I need to get my stuff and I need to get in the car and I need to go so I'm not late. And you can also break things into manageable pieces on the calendar. You can put in long-term projects and then break them apart into little pieces and back them up on the calendar. You can schedule in downtime and fun time with your friends. You can create mini calendars on your Google Calendar and color code them so that you've got like fun stuff to look forward to later in the week. So for dyslexia, things I'd recommend: technology, definitely your friend. You can get digital books that have built-in accommodations, like changing the font to something that's friendlier for dyslexic eyes. Kurzweil text-to-speech assistive tech, so helpful, helps a student read at the same speed as a neurotypical student. The recommendation section of the neuropsych report, always worth a refresher. They're always going to have really interesting insights as to what your student could be doing that's going to help them out more. And while there is dyscalculia, which is separate from dyslexia, dyslexia often impacts math as much as anything else. So don't forget that your student may need math support. This is not just a reading and writing issue always. And one size does not fit all, especially for dyslexia. Some students want to slow down and read each word and syllable at a time. Other students are going to do better if they come up with mnemonics in order to remember things. Like reading just will not help encode into their brain. So they're going to come up with songs or rhymes or like goofy pictures to encode information. Other students really enjoy that active reading intervention I was talking about. So really writing stuff down in the text. And that's going to look a little more like this. So underlining information and circling transition words, starring the main idea, summarizing paragraphs. This can all create a map of where information is located in a passage. And passages that don't have as much white space makes them more difficult for people with reading difficulties to be able to understand like what's going on. It's just harder to see. And long texts can be intimidating. So I'd say cover up paragraphs, diagrams, anything you don't need to be looking at, whether it's with your hand, a piece of paper, cross off unnecessary information, just like get really tight in with what you actually want to read. Check out the first and last sentence of a paragraph as sort of a recap for, okay, this is what I think I just read. What do the first and last sentences tell me as well? The more that you can physically engage with the text, the easier it's going to be if you're a student with dyslexia. And this is the book that I was teasing at the beginning. I strongly recommend if you have dyslexia or you know somebody who does. The Dyslexic Advantage is a fascinating peek inside the brain to see like what are the benefits of having dyslexia, why evolutionarily might it be there. Some really interesting examples of people with dyslexia, how they overcame that and how they used it to become the titans of industry that they are today. Fun fact, Anne Rice, very famous author, dyslexic. And they talk about how she made that journey. So I found it to be absolutely fascinating. There's definitely schools in my area that work mostly with dyslexic students who love the Dyslexic Advantage. So strong recommend personally from me. If you've got memory or retrieval issues, limit the amount of information you need to be learned. Don't try to cram everything. Shorter is better. You want to review prior knowledge so that when you are learning something new, you've got something to hook into it. And you want to make sure that you're spacing out your study sessions. It's much better to do a little bit every day than one big cram session. And you want to make sure you're using both visual and auditory pathways when you're learning. So not just reading, but also listening to something or watching something on TV about what you're studying. In summary, before I start taking your questions, every brain is different. These are all suggestions, and there are some things that work for some learning differences that might also work for somebody with another one. What I would really emphasize is to be really positive reinforcing, affirming. The main goal here is to build self-efficacy. Any individual grade or quiz is not as important as that shift in self-concept and self-belief. Oftentimes, students with learning differences spend a long time thinking something is wrong with them before they figure out that it's actually something going on in their brain. It's not their fault. So I think emphasizing, hey, look what you accomplished, can be really, really helpful. And you want to be flexible and responsive and creative. I love working with students with LDs because it requires me to be more innovative in the ways that I work with my students. You also want to emphasize thinking strategically. You know, what is the best way for you to do this? Like, what's the best way to get this thing done? You want to put the student at the center, help them gain that sense of agency, and make sure that they feel comfortable advocating for themselves. That is the best skill that I could ever hope for one of my students to have, to be a great self-advocate. So lastly, just a reminder that we build skills for school and beyond, whether it's academic tutoring, test prep, or executive function coaching. Every student is different, and I will drop a link to our Calendly in the chat when we're done, so that if you are interested in talking with an Apple Ruth advisor, you can make an appointment right now. And we have coming up Apple Ruth's writing workshops. I'm really excited about these. I just finished working with one student who really enjoyed it. It's a 5-part curriculum working on helping students improve their writing. And if you're interested, you can make an appointment to talk with a program advisor today. And again, I'll put that link in the chat. And lastly, coming up in September, I can't believe September is around the corner. We've got 3 keys to academic success: Brain Science 101, polishing your study skills, and your moment of brilliance. So you can sign up for all of that at appleruth.com/academic success. And now we have reached the Q&A portion of the evening. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because this is not a very interesting slide. And I can't wait to answer all of your questions. All right, so can you discuss a couple of strategies that we can use to assist a 5th grade little boy on managing ADHD and dyslexia? Absolutely, thank you so much. So a lot of what I was talking about with ADHD and dyslexia can be really helpful with your little boy. So, you know, letting him move around, letting him listen to things and not just have to read them. I think that being patient and getting things that he enjoys reading. What was really fascinating to me when I was reading that book that I strongly recommend that you get, especially as you have a younger student who's been diagnosed, was that oftentimes dyslexic students would get really bored in class because they wanted to do the deep understanding. Like, they didn't want to be in beginning biology. They wanted to be in AP biology immediately because it was so fascinating, but they were having difficulty getting through beginning biology in order to get to AP. So I'd say if there's anything that he's really interested in, that he gets really excited about, get him that kind of information. Make reading fun because it's got information in it that he's going to be really excited about. How can we help a student with ADHD succeed in colleges? Do you have a list of colleges who go beyond saying they will offer required accommodations if requested to actively supporting students with programs through their college years? Really great question. So Curry College, the college that had the app wheel, definitely has a really strong track record for supporting students with learning differences. So I would definitely recommend checking them out. There's a wide variety of schools. I would say that I think it would be really helpful if you asked, like, hey, can we talk to some students of yours at the school? So talking to the disability center and saying, like, hey, what do you offer for our student? Like, what kind of supports do you have? Because some supports are free that come with the college, and some supports you have to pay extra. So I would say definitely talk to the disability center, talk with them, saying, like, how do these accommodations happen? How much advocating does my student need to do? And can we talk to some students who use your services? so that you can actually see what their experience is like. But there are definitely schools like Curry, like Beacon is another one that really specialize on working with students with learning differences to make sure that they're really fully supported. So that offers a lot of support. Sometimes students with ADHD don't need as much as like a full college experience to be supporting them, but I would say that those are definitely two places I would recommend looking at. What strategies can you offer a high school junior boy with ADHD who has AP psychology as his last class? Oof. His class is 90 minutes long. He's in school from 8:15 to 3:30, very little breaks. Yeah, it's the very little breaks thing that's really, really hard. So I would say thinking about it strategically. So like, is there a way that he can make sure that he has a snack right before that class? Is he hydrating? Is he able to, during that very little break, maybe like walk up and down the hallways a little bit? Is there any way that he can make sure that he gets preferential seating? So if it's important for him that he need to be like sitting up front in the class so that he's not distracted by everyone who's in front of him, that can be helpful in maintaining concentration as well. And I know that all teenagers are going to laugh at me, but like sleep, it's just so important and none of us are getting enough. And I would say that if he's really dying in that class, that he should probably take a look at whether he's getting enough sleep. And part of that is also probably going to be when's the last time he looks at a device before he goes to sleep, which I know is such an unpopular thing to say, but like if he can get the phone in a different room of the house and have a regular alarm clock so that he's not tempted to get that blue light going into his face right before he goes to bed, I think that's going to be really important. I think we all kind of are guilty of underestimating the amount of sleep that we need. And that's a really long school day and it's a really long class. So I think, you know, keeping that in mind, also if his teacher will allow him to have like a fidget spinner or doodling. If he's not taking notes, very good idea. And if he can draw pictures on the sides of his notes of hopefully what the teacher's talking about, but just ways of keeping his brain engaged, that can also be really helpful. All right, one last question. Thank you so much. How much do you think screen time relates to inability to self-regulate? Oh man. I mean, I am not an expert on screen time and what it does to elementary aged kids' brains. I think that, you know, some self-regulation is going to be difficult for elementary aged kids, you know, like that's part of what they're learning. So I would say maybe focus more on helping them to recognize when you want them to self-regulate and working on that skill, not necessarily like linking it directly to screen time, but sort of saying like, how can we find opportunities in our day-to-day to practice self-regulating? Any help or tips for note-taking? Oh, Leah. So what I would recommend is that you check out our upcoming webinar. We've got one on study skills in September. So I would definitely recommend that you check that out. Oh, and let me grab in the chat. Let me see. But yeah, we've got an upcoming webinar that's going to be on study skills, on all of that good, important stuff. And I would say that that's going to be really, really helpful for talking about notes, just as like a quick Googleable thing. I love Cornell notes. They're my favorite. So I would say if you've got a student who's really struggling, I would say have them check out Cornell Notes because it makes it really, really easy for them to figure out what's important and like create their own kind of study guide, which is really great. So polishing your study skills is going to be on September 21st. So I would definitely recommend that. And if anyone's thinking that they'd really like to talk to somebody more about, you know, if your student is taking a high stakes test, if they're struggling in a particular subject, this is a really, really great place. Let me see, can I send that through? I may not be able to send it to all of you. So I would say, oh, thank you so much. Oops, I think that looks like our Zoom link. If you wouldn't mind doing the Calendly link instead. Thank you so much. Yes, perfect. So if anyone is interested in talking to somebody more about getting specific assistance for a student, you can click on that Calendly link right now and set up an appointment. And lastly, I'll finish it off and then I'm really going to let you all go. Can you recommend strategies for getting a 14-year-old with ADHD to get more sleep? She can't fall asleep easily. I totally get that. And that comes back actually to the norepinephrine that I was talking about earlier, where your brain is just going. So what I'd recommend is that she creates sort of a ritual for going to bed where she can let her body know, like, hey, now is the time. Like, I'm lighting my lavender candle so I can smell something nice as I'm getting ready for bed. And I'm going to do the crossword in bed now. And maybe I'll like read a little bit in my book. I love Headspace personally, and they do have student accounts, so that might make it a little bit easier on the budget. And they've got nighttime meditations, and that can be anything from just a 10-minute body scan to check in with yourself and review the day as you go off to sleep. They've got like bedtime stories for adults basically that last 45 minutes. So if you've got a little time to kill, that can be really helpful. So I like those because then it's not, I'm lying in bed with just my thoughts pattering around in my brain. It gives you words to listen to. It gives you a narrative to listen to. So it sort of replaces the monologue going on in your head with something soothing, with some nice background music. So I would definitely recommend checking out Headspace. And can I recommend an ADHD coach in the North Atlanta area? I sure can. Apple Ruth does executive function coaching, and we can work with your ADHD student, and we are for sure in the North Atlanta area. Awesome. Thank you all so much. It was really wonderful getting to speak with all of you, and a really wonderful Q&A session as well. If y'all have any questions, I look forward to hearing from you, and have a wonderful night.